MSW Media.
They Might Be Giants have been on the road for too long. And They Might Be Giants aren't even sorry.
Not even sorry.
And audiences like the shows too much. And now They Might Be Giants are playing their breakthrough album, Flood.
All of it.
And they still have time for other songs.
They're fooling around.
Who can stop They Might Be Giants and their liberal rock agenda?
Who?
No one.
This ad was paid for with somebody else's money.
The rule of law is not just some lawyer's turn of phrase. It is the very foundation of our democracy. The essence of the rule of law is that like cases are treated alike. That there not be one rule for Democrats and another for Republicans, one rule for the powerful, another for the powerless, one rule for the rich and another for the poor, or different rules depending upon one's race or ethnicity. To serve as Attorney General at this critical time is a calling I am honored and eager to answer.
So yeah, now it's clean up on aisle 45 time. And for a long while yet, it is going to be clean up on aisle 45.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Clean Up on Aisle 45. It's Wednesday, June 22nd, and this is episode 75, our diamond anniversary. I'm your co-host, Allison Gill, and with me, as always, real-life lawyer and good friend, Andrew Torrez.
Oh, and Allison, we should say, is reporting live from Washington, D.C., attending the January 6th hearings. I am so jealous.
It's really, truly unbelievable. I've got to meet with and have dinner with and sit with so many incredible people. And I got to tell you, Andrew, it's very different when you're in the room. There's a lot of stuff that happens that you can't see on television. For example, when, we think it's a meme that goes up on the screen that says that John Eastman emailed Rudy Giuliani asking to be put on a pardons list. There was an audible gasp in the room.
Oh yeah.
We looked around because the press tables are behind us, and I'm looking at them mouthing the words. This is new, right? Is this new? Because I don't want to tweet out breaking if this is already out there. And they just sort of went by it pretty quickly, And we were all just sitting there like, what the fuck? That's a phone call favor.
Oh yeah.
Sir, you don't put in an email to Rudy Giuliani on a public university server that you want to be added to a pardons list. So that and when we learned about somebody who knew a Proud Boy as an informant saying the Proud Boys would have killed Pence if they had the chance, given the chance, audible gasps again in the room.
I love that. I think that's so valuable. I was actually, I watched as much of that Thursday hearing as I could, recorded the rest, and we had to record opening arguments in the interregnum. And so taking a break between the two episodes was when I found out if there's still that pardons list, I think I should be on it from John Eastman. And it just confirmed for me from the very beginning that John Eastman is the Kansas City mob boss from Casino, the one who wrote all of his expenses down in the diary, in the notebooks. Yeah. And it all comes crashing down because this idiot is too stupid not to write every goddamn thing down. And, I discovering back in March that he wrote hey, since we've done a little light criming already, how about a little more to Greg Jacob, makes me, if there is any smoking gun document, right? The other side is, Donald Trump is 75 years old and has spent his entire adult life as a mob boss and is smart enough to do the hey man, I just want to ask you a favor. And, he doesn't use email and he doesn't put stuff down around him. And all that's true. But if there's a document out there that's like, I talked to Trump and, while he knows this is bullshit, he's ready to give me the go ahead. boy, John Eastman is dumb enough to have written that one down in print. So,
and we might have
I'm
something
hoping.
close to that, which we're going to talk about
Yep.
in a little bit. That might be something pushing right up to that edge. We will find out. But yeah, not the smartest crayon in the sea. And we're lucky for that, because our next fascist coup leaders may be smart. So
no, that's why that's the other important aspect of being there and of the January 6th committee work, right? Which is the next effort for this will not be as incompetent as this one was. So
yeah, all failed coups are dress rehearsals. So
yeah.
All right.
Well, thank you for being there. Before continuing, we want to thank our new patrons: Christopher Chasteen, Nicole Mars, Switch 1024, and remember, if it doesn't say Micro Machines, it's not the real thing. If Johnny Machida listens to our show, I will be giddy for the rest of the day. Johnny, if that's you, please let us know.
Oh my God, if it doesn't say Micro Machines, it's not the real thing. I remember that. And remember that you too can get a shout out by heading over to patreon.com/aisle45pod. We would love to hear more 80s commercials. You can pledge as little as $1 an episode. You'll get the ad-free version of the show. You'll also get the bonuses, the Zoom calls we do. We'll be doing that again very soon. By the way, we'll put that date out shortly. But again, that's patreon.com/aisle, AISLE45POD.
Yep. So let's begin. This is going to obviously be a January 6th heavy episode. I want to talk about a bit of tension between the January 6th committee and the Department of Justice. Now, I think you're going to agree that this has been overblown in the press, but it centers right now on the highest profile set of cases that we know about, right? Which are the prosecution of Joseph Biggs and the Proud Boys, right? Along with the Oath Keepers. These are the guys who were charged with 18 U.S.C. Section 2384, seditious conspiracy. I think that's a leading indicator as to where the DOJ ultimately wants to charge Donald Trump. But, I'm a noted optimist.
Yeah, I'm still a little bit on the 1512C2 train. But
I see that.
The quote unquote tension is that prosecutors want to just put and I got to tell you, Tim Heaphy works for the committee. There's like 40 former DOJ guys. I don't see this necessarily as tension, but we'll get into it.
Yeah.
It's that prosecutors want to just put their heads down, do their job, which in this case is to convince Judge Timothy Kelly of the U.S. District Court of the District of Columbia that Tarrio, Biggs, and the Proud Boys are guilty of the 9 crimes with which they've been charged. And at the same time, the January 6th committee is trying to educate the Department of Justice and the public in general that the Proud Boys were essentially the muscle being used by Trump and his co-conspirators to carry out the disruption of the Electoral Count. If you've seen that amazing New York Times video reporting where they put all that together, I would recommend checking that out. So it wasn't surprising that Biggs and his fellow Proud Boys were front and center during the committee's opening statements 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, that's right. And that led Biggs to make and to supplement 2 separate motions last Thursday, the 16th, right? The first one was to postpone the trial for 4 months from August 8th to December 12th. And the second, this was supplementing an earlier request by Tarrio to change venue, to move the trial from D.C. to Miami, right? And there are really 2 new arguments that Biggs is making here. One is that the ongoing January 6th hearings are prejudicing the jury pool. And so we should, quote, wait until the dust has settled. That's their words, not mine, right? or, I guess, move the trial to Miami, right? And then the second argument is that in order to prepare their defense, that is Biggs's lawyers, which now include the laughably incompetent InfoWars host Norm Pattis, but that Biggs and his lawyers need access to the January 6th committee transcripts from interviews and depositions that they have done with various witnesses that could be potentially exculpatory, and those aren't scheduled to be released until September, which would be well after the trial was underway.
Yeah, okay, but you can't be Brady'd for stuff you don't have, but whatever.
That's true. That's true.
And I don't want to seem pro-Proud Boy here, because I'm not. I am pro-DOJ winning their case.
I think it's highly unlikely anyone would think that of you.
I am pro-DOJ winning their case, because they seem like pretty decent arguments. And so on the very same day, Department of Justice consented to, quote, wait until the dust has settled, unquote, and move the trial to December. Now, of course, they're all in pretrial detention, so they hate this.
Right.
In that consent, the DOJ also represented that it does not have access to the transcripts, no ability to compel Congress to provide copies, and has repeatedly requested DOJ give up those, or the committee give up those transcripts. And this seems like pretty strategic concession to me, right? Because we're going to talk about here in a minute what Judge Kelly has sort of decided on some of these points.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And the key point that you raised there is something I think the government really strategically headed off, right? Which is all of these folks are presently being detained without bail, right? And so moving to extend the trial date is a good thing if you're a criminal defendant who's been released. It's typically a bad thing if you're already in prison, right? Well, the government's like, yeah, sure, fine, whatever. You want to stick around in prison a little longer and concede that we have not violated your right to a speedy trial? Great, let's have at it. Okay. So the government has not yet filed its opposition to that newly amended motion to transfer venue, but I can assure you there is no way they want to litigate this case in Miami, obviously, right? And I also thought that the consent was really smartly written, as you allude to basically concede the good argument that Biggs was making, right? That like, yeah, it would make it easier for both sides if they had access to these DOJ transcripts. But to draw the line in the sand, as they do, and say, look, this should not support a motion to change venue. And the real issue, I think, here, which is what the government fronts, it should not allow or serve as the basis to have any of the Proud Boy defendants try and sever out of this trial on the basis of, oh, hey, yeah, you mentioned, Biggs by name, but you didn't mention me, Nordine or some of the other guys. And so I should get my own trial that's uncontaminated by that. And the government explicitly said, we would not consent to that.
Yeah. And that's Tario, Nordine, Real, whom the government wants to try jointly with Biggs and Spazzo, Dominic Pizzola. And so the very next day, Friday, Judge Kelly entered a minute order that requires any responses, including related requests to sever, to be filed by the end of the day Monday. That's today, as we record this, and for any opposition to be filed tomorrow. And as of this record, no motions to sever have been filed.
Yeah, and we'll obviously monitor and supplement if we can. But look, if that's the case, this is an unambiguous win by the government, right? You postpone the trial for criminal defendants who are already in custody. They're not free and out there and, giving interviews on InfoWars. And you avoid the potential of
tainting a jury. Appeal.
Yep, exactly right. And so there's another happy outcome, which is that I'm going to get documents early. So that's always happy. The existing deadline was that the committee was going to release its transcripts in September. But as part of the consent, this was document number 404 in the case, right? The DOJ filed Exhibit 1 to that, so 404-1, a letter from the DOJ to Tim Heaphy, who is the chief investigative counsel to the January 6th committee, that renewed its earlier request that the January 6th committee provide it with transcripts from the interviews and depositions that it has conducted that are likely relevant to ongoing investigations and prosecutions. This was signed, top down by Matthew Graves, who's the U.S. attorney who is overall in charge of January 6th prosecutions, also by AUSA's Ken Polite and Matt Olson.
Yeah, and the one-page letter is really, really interesting, both in terms of what it says explicitly and also in terms of what it implies. So I'm going to read briefly from it. It's going to come in handy later in something else I'm going to talk about, too. Quote, "It is now readily apparent that the interviews the Select Committee conducted are not just potentially relevant to our overall criminal investigations, but are likely relevant to specific prosecutions that have already commenced." That means Biggs, Proud Boys. Yep. Given this overlap, it's critical that the Select Committee provide us with copies of the transcripts of all its witness interviews. As you are aware, grand jury investigations are not public, and the Select Committee does not and will not know the identity of all the witnesses who have information relevant to the department's ongoing criminal investigation. That tells us that grand juries are still impaneled and potentially ready to hand down additional indictments. And I don't think you'd put it that way if you weren't at least trying to imply that you might indict Trump. And let's remember, Andrew, too, somebody who made a little blip of an appearance in that first hearing was a guy named Jeremy Bertino, who was raided by the FBI the same day Tarrio was arrested. And he has not been charged. So he presumably seems to be cooperating with the committee and probably also the Department of Justice. But we don't know. There's just so much we don't know. And that's why and Adam Schiff knows this too, Andrew. When he's up there like, hey, just tell us specifically what transcripts you want. He knows that the DOJ can't do that without revealing who's under investigation.
Yeah, I think all of that is correct, right? And so, yes, it is fun for, the New York Times to sort of spin this up as tension between the committee and the DOJ. I actually want to give
they just seem
some
like normal
voice.
Filings to me.
This is just they have slightly different ends, right? And so those ends can be legitimate. They can each be legitimate, and you just sort of differ on what weight to give them. So let me give a little bit of voice to the January 6th committee's arguments, right? Like, because you and I tend to come down on the prosecution side because at the end of the day, we want to see Trump in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit, right? But the January 6th committee's arguments are not dumb. They're not bad, right? They are, at least, I had two good arguments that I can think of as to why you would want to slow walk turning over your transcripts to the DOJ, right? The first and by far the most important is that, as Liz Cheney has reminded us at every turn, these investigations are ongoing, right? In between the public hearings, they are still interviewing witnesses. They are still talking to folks. And when shit is going badly, and by the way, if you were an insurrectionist or co-conspirator, shit's going badly, right? Like, these three hearings have been bombshells, as you pointed out, right? That's when other rats dive off of the sinking ship, right? So, it is not implausible to me to say, hey, we're hoping that these public hearings convince some of the folks in the Trump White House who didn't talk to us before that maybe the time is now to talk to us and, possibly ward off the next insurrection. Like, I don't see how you can't, if you were ideologically similar to Greg Jacob, right? Pence's chief counsel, who was by far the star witness on hearing number 3, right? And again, Greg Jacob, not a guy. If you and I were hanging out having beers with Greg Jacob, we would disagree with every other word that came out of his mouth, right? Like, he's the chief counsel to Mike Pence, right? Like a evil Christian dominionist goblin, right? Like,
yeah, and I also really didn't like his idea of the inartfully written 12th Amendment, but whatever.
Right? Yeah, and the in wording off, right? In correctly calling John Eastman bullshit, right? That selectively quotes out several paragraphs of his email saying, I totally agree with you. It's going to be a disaster when Democrats take over, and they have no regard for the country, and they're, they hate Jesus, and they so this is not a liberal guy. And if you were at the Trump White House and you had respect for Greg Jacob and you watched what he did on Wednesday, you might think, I'm going to talk to Liz Cheney now. And you might be a little bit more hesitant if you think that Liz Cheney is just a back channel to prosecutors, right? So that's the first argument. I think it's pretty good.
It is, yeah. And sort of like nudge, nudge, Pat Cipollone, right? Like,
yeah.
I personally think the whole reason to use that Jared clip twice, by the way, was to make Pat Cipollone mad.
I can't say that's wrong, right? Like we don't know what's going on in their heads. I think they're trying to shake loose more folks from the tree. So I get saying, hey, look, talk to us.
We don't want to look like we're cooperating with the Department of Justice here.
Yep, exactly right. And then that's the second aspect is just as a lawyer, I can tell you finalizing transcripts is not as simple as just emailing out the contents of your, saved directory, right? Like when someone gives a deposition, they have the legal right. And so when someone gives a voluntary interview, you extend them that same courtesy. for their lawyer to go over that transcript and make sure that the transcript accurately reflects the testimony of the witness. And you typically have 30 days to do that, right? And I've told stories before about how lawyers have abused that process. I once had opposing counsel try to insert a not that was clearly not said during. Yeah, but you get that, like, this takes time. And right now, we know we're going to talk about this in the B segment, like, the January 6th committee has a billion balls in the air and saying, like, come on, man. Like, I know I want to get Torrez the transcripts too, but like, let us do our job in June 1st. And then in July, we'll finalize some transcripts for you.
Sure. And I agree, but don't criticize the Department of Justice as taking time if you're going to slow walk getting them what they need. And I want to be clear here. The Department of Justice doesn't desperately need the Department of or the committee's transcripts because they don't want to do their own interviews and they don't want to work and they're just sitting around smoking fucking bowls. They need these. I'm going to go over why they need these transcripts, but we know and I'm going to go over it in detail, but it's not about, well, we just don't feel like interviewing these people. We want to just ride the committee's coattails and let them do all the work. That's not what this is about. And I think it's important.
Yeah, absolutely not. Absolutely
important to point that out. I don't think anybody who listens to our show thinks that that's what's going on. And also one other thing I wanted to point out, Andrew, with regards to the Proud Boys seeing if they're going to file any motions to sever, which they haven't yet, trying to change venue to Miami. There was also Ethan Nordine filed a motion to be released from pretrial detention based on speedy trial considerations.
Right.
And Judge Kelly said, no. And he basically, he pointed out, because Nordine had argued the government violated his speedy trial rights by holding him more than 90 days. But Kelly says, thanks to numerous motions that you filed and COVID-related exceptions, 0 time has elapsed under the speedy trial clock.
Yep.
So they aren't going to get out. If they're asking to move their shit to December, they aren't going to get out of prison waiting for it.
Yeah, you don't get to say, I'd like to delay the trial by 4 months, and also like, oh, look, now we're outside the 3 months that the Speedy Trial Act. No, right? You equitably toll the running of the clock when you've consented
and these
to stay in prison.
So, these dumb lawyers might be like, well, then never mind, we don't want to. And it's like, no, bro, too late. We already agreed. We're doing it in December.
Absolutely right. That filing was inexplicable. You and I went back and forth over the weekend because that was the one where Nordine, this is filing number 405-1, attached the 1776 plan to his own filing, believing that was exculpatory evidence. And boy, like, we could do an entire separate segment on that. But yeah, no, the detailed plan for how to occupy the Capitol and
because it didn't include the Capitol itself. It only included the targeted buildings and the surrounding buildings, right? The Cannon, Longhorn.
Yep.
Which by Rayburn, which happened to just be where Loudermilk was giving tours to people on January 5th who were taking pictures of staircases and tunnels to the Capitol complex. But whatevs, I'm sure this is totally like they said, tourist visit. These are just tourists, Andrew.
Yeah. So these. I'm glad you brought that to our attention. The level of disconnect in reality is kind of terrifying. And again, it highlights why I have been opposed to the denigration of anybody appointed by Donald Trump as a Trump judge, right? Instead, I've said, look, like, yeah, the Justins and Corys, Justin Walker, Naomi Rao, these folks who are ideologues with no experience. Yeah, sure. Like, we shouldn't call them judges. They are hacks in robes.
Trevor McFadden even found a bench trial defendant guilty of obstructing an official proceeding last week.
Yep. It really does. It goes to show you that there are folks who were conservative, who were ideologically aligned with the last president, who nevertheless are horrified by what's going on. And that's that again, all of that. I know I'm an optimist. I know, Tweet at me the Lucy with the football memes, but it gives
and I'm
me
Lucy.
confidence.
I feel like I'm Lucy. You know.
I will always run up.
No,
and kick
I'm
the
with you.
football for
It gives me confidence too. And Matthew Graves going out on a limb to charge seditious conspiracy.
Yeah, I did. What it carries the same effectively. Right, the same penalty as 1512. And why do you do that? That's why I called it a leading indicator. It seems to me you say, yeah, we better knock some rust off the old spikes.
Yeah, to say I have enough
before a
evidence.
pretty serious charge.
I
Yeah.
have enough evidence here to say that this wasn't just obstructing what Congress was trying to do that day. This was seditious activity. They were trying to overthrow the government by force, or the electoral count or an official proceeding by force to stop the law from being,
to interfere with the lawful operation of the Electoral Count Act.
There you go.
And that plainly, and that you need those three elements, right? You need an agreement, you need force, and you need a lawful proceeding that you were trying to interrupt, and in this case, succeeded at interrupting. So
yeah, and that's why a lot of people are trying to file motions saying that the electoral count is not an official proceeding, and they're like, that's where 11 out of 12 judges agree.
It's very hard. If the ceremonial opening of electors by the vice president before a joint session of Congress is not an official proceeding, it is almost impossible for me to imagine what is.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, one of those Rudy Giuliani Holiday Inn horseshoe fraudulent elector things, because that's what they're arguing. But I want to talk a little bit about why the DOJ needs these transcripts a little bit more, and what happened to the DOJ hearing that was supposed to take place on Wednesday. Because
absolutely,
Wednesday is when that letter came from Department of Justice to Tim Heaphy, the second letter, the more aggressive,
Yeah, that is right, and it is worth pointing out because we were made aware of it on Thursday the 16th, but that's because that's when it was attached to the concession, right? To
yes.
the consent. It was issued on June 15th. Absolutely correct.
Yes, and I flew in on a red eye to make that hearing because I wanted to be in the room with the DOJ hearing. I was at the hearing Thursday, where Luttig and Greg Jacob testified about the pressure campaign against Pence. I'll be there for Tuesday's hearing, which is tomorrow for us, yesterday for listeners, with Raffensperger and his deputy and the Arizona Republican Speaker of the House. That hearing will be led by Adam Schiff, who told CNN, Dana Bash, that the committee has evidence tying Donald directly to the fraudulent elector scheme.
I am so jealous. So I want to focus in on a little talked about draft letter that was written to Trump again by our friend, the bookkeeper Frank from Kansas City, John Eastman. Right. So Eastman is redlining a proposal to proceed under the 12th Amendment. The original says, and this is, we don't know the author. I assume it's Ken Cheesebro, but
could be, yeah.
Could be. There are others that were involved. We know Cleta Mitchell sought out John Eastman as the 12th Amendment expert 2 days after the election. So tough to say. The original says, 1, the president of the Senate decides authoritatively what certificates from the states to open and what electoral votes are counted under the 12th Amendment. And the Electoral Count Act, right, that's 3 U.S.C. 15, implements that, right? And so Eastman says, I don't agree with this. The 12th Amendment only says that the president of the Senate opens the ballots in the joint session, and then in the passive voice that the votes shall then be counted. And 3 U.S.C. 12, right, just earlier in the book, says merely that he is the presiding officer. And then it spells out the specific procedures, presumptions, and default rules for which states will be counted. And again, this is all Eastman's words. Nowhere, this is Eastman, nowhere does it suggest that the president of the Senate gets to make the determination on his own. Section 15 doesn't either, end of quote. And the punchline is that comment by Eastman is dated October 11th, 2020, weeks before the election, months before he drafted that cockamamie bullshit plan and again, I'm quoting Greg Jacob here. That's not just me saying it. That says, well, obviously Pence has the absolute right to determine what electors are valid or right. It's a clear indication. It is the strongest evidence we have that Eastman did not think that what he would eventually propose and lobby Pence to do was in any way legal. It's a crucial document.
It is, and it was just up on the screen for a moment in Thursday's hearing, and then it was gone. And I got a picture of it. I was like, what the fuck was that? Go back. And I think that draft letter might come up again. I'm not sure if it's what Schiff is referring to when he says that he has evidence the former president's direct involvement. That was a letter to POTUS, but there was no apparently response from POTUS. And since we record on Monday and we air on Wednesday, I can only speculate that whatever evidence that is will be revealed in Tuesday's hearing. And as you're listening to this, you'll probably know what it is by now. But Andrew, I was also scheduled to be in the hearing room on Wednesday for the hearing that was going to include former Department of Justice officials Donahue and Jeffrey Rosen, former acting attorney general and as deputy. And I was looking forward to that hearing because I think we would have learned Jeffrey Clark's role, perhaps why Scott Perry wanted a pardon and was so keen on replacing acting AG Rosen with Jeffrey Clark. And we might have learned more about Clark's involvement with the fraudulent slate of electors scheme based on the letters he drafted to the 7 target states saying their elections were under scrutiny at Department of Justice, which was a lie. We've only seen the Georgia letter. But we've heard that there are other letters for each of those states. But, well, remember, Trump said, just announce there's an investigation and me and my congressional Republicans will handle the rest, right?
Shockingly plausible in light of, what Trump told Zelensky back in 2019, right? In any event, I think you were right to focus in on that letter. We had not seen that document before. It had not previously been released in the Eastman litigation, but we had seen other indications, which you and I talked about on this show, and we have both talked about separately on our respective shows, that Eastman, prior to the failure of state legislatures to convene and certify alternative slates of electors, was pushing the line of alternative slates of electors are key to the whole process. So I think you're absolutely right to season on that. I just wanted to kind of bring that one to a close. Then I want to say, with respect to Donahue, Rosen, and the effort to bring in environmental lawyer Jeffrey Clark as attorney general. I mean, it's just some.
We'll call you
Donahue's
if there's an
testimony
oil
on this. Yeah, that is just a high comedy of the highest regard. But so. Here's what happened. Zoe Lofgren went on television, told the public that the hearing that included Donahue and Rosen had been postponed because the videographers, right? And the videographers had to work overtime to get Bill Stepian's video testimony up because Stepien didn't appear because his wife was giving birth. And so he couldn't appear. And then the videographers were just too tired to put together the Donahue and Rosen hearing after that last minute cancellation. How did that strike you?
Yeah, no, that doesn't sit right with me. I'll tell you why. Obviously, it just seems ridiculous on its face, right? But you're the fucking Congress. You don't have a couple extra videographers you can put. Like, hey, I'll help.
Yeah.
But recently, Merrick Garland and a U.S. attorney in D.C., Matt Graves, and all of us watched the trial of one Michael Sussman. You and I have covered it at length. You and I have said from the beginning that even if the case makes it to trial, that Durham, the prosecution, Durham special counsel appointed by Barr, works for Department of Justice, had no chance of conviction. None.
Yeah, and by the way, defense verdict, right, in like 12 minutes. So, that's a swish on that one from you and I. And the reason that we were able to call that from the very beginning was because of materiality, right? Durham had argued that Sussman lied to the FBI, namely Jim Baker, right? And that his alleged lie was material, but it wasn't, right? The lie didn't make a bit of difference in how the FBI did or did not conduct the probe, right? In fact, they agreed to prevent press stories from going out, right? So But I think I see where you're going with this, right? That there was another reason beyond materiality why the Sussman prosecution failed so spectacularly. And I think I love where you're going.
Yeah. If you remember, Jim Baker was a single solitary witness to the alleged lie that Sussman told. But Jim Baker didn't just testify to Durham's grand jury. He also answered questions in a Department of Justice Office of Inspector General investigation into the meeting. And he testified to Congress about that meeting. And as it turns out, all three of his interviews said different things. He said different things in all three of those. He told Congress, I think, that he didn't recall if Sussman was there on behalf of a client. He told the grand jury for Durham, oh, yeah, he was, after being shown some notes, very specific notes, and not being shown some other notes that he told someone about, like secondhand notes. So he told the grand jury something different than he told Congress, and he told the OIG something different than he told the other two that he believed Sussman was there on behalf of a client. But so we have three different, so that's not good.
No, that is exactly right. And when you have that kind of, and specifically to have three conflicting versions of the story is pretty spectacularly great in terms of, were you lying now? Are you lying now? Were you lying then? Or were you lying in the middle? Right? Like it's, it's the dream. It literally is when they teach you how to conduct cross-examination, that this is the classic lawyer question, right? Of were you lying then or are you lying now? So that
and they'll
is
object,
as
and
bad
then
as
you
it gets.
say no because this goes towards impeachment, and they will overrule the guy's objection, and you can continue to ask those questions.
Yep. So put it all together for us.
Oh, right. So why am I bringing up the Sussman case, right? Why the fuck are you talking about Sussman with regards to the January 6th Department of Justice and the committee hearings? Well, first, we know on January 25th of 2021, just under 3 weeks after the attack on the Capitol, the Department of Justice Office of Inspector General launched an investigation into Donald's former Justice Department officials.
And this has not been talked about really anywhere, right? That read, for immediate release, the DOJ Office of the Inspector General is initiating an investigation into whether any current or former DOJ official engaged in an improper attempt to have DOJ seek to alter the outcome of the 2020 presidential election. The investigation will encompass all relevant allegations that may arise that are within the scope of the OIG's jurisdiction, right? That is internal investigation of the Department of Justice. The OIG has jurisdiction to investigate allegations concerning the conduct of former and current DOJ employees, and their jurisdiction does not extend to allegations against other governmental officials.
Right. So that was a year and a half ago, almost.
Yep.
Stands to reason both Donahue and Rosen have been questioned by the DOJ Office of the Inspector General and others who participated in the discussion about maybe the mass resignation, that were maybe people that were at the January 4th meeting. And the Jeffrey Clark letters would have already been interviewed. Those folks with knowledge of those letters might already been interviewed by the Office of Inspector General. Jeffrey Clark might have been interviewed by the Office of the Inspector General.
Yeah.
Because generally, the DOJ, you don't really go generally interview targets usually, but the Inspector General does all the time. And additionally, Donahue and Rosen have testified to the Congressional Committee about the same set of events. And it wouldn't be unheard of if they've testified before a federal grand jury.
That's such a good point.
In the sprawling 1-6 probe, because Merrick Garland testified last year he would take whatever recommendations the Office of the Inspector General made to him with regards to their investigation into former DOJ officials and current, but I'm focused on the former.
As I think you should be. No, that's really, really brilliant. It is nothing that anyone has said so far. And when you put it all together, think about how that dovetails with our first story, right? So we were talking about that Wednesday, June 15th letter about interview transcripts. In the part that you didn't read during the A block, right, it also emphasized the importance of testing witness credibility. It said, quote, "It is critical that the department be able to evaluate the credibility of witnesses who have provided statements to multiple governmental entities in assessing the strength of any potential criminal prosecutions," end of quote.
Yeah, so put all that together. Back into Sussman world, Jim Baker testifies before Congress, the grand jury, and the OIG. Presumably, Donahue and Clark and Rosen have testified before Congress, the Department of Justice, OIG, and perhaps even a federal grand jury. Same three entities, right?
Yeah.
Inconsistent testimony tanked that Sussman prosecution, in part. Materiality also did. It was just bullshit. But any inconsistent testimony in the Donahue-Rosen interviews could tank an investigation into Clark and perhaps even Donald. So it's my gut feeling, and again, this is speculation, but I don't think that hearing was postponed because the videographers were tired. I think Department of Justice public testimony was delayed so that the DOJ maybe could review the testimony for consistency, maybe coordinate what they're going to say publicly, because I don't think that DOJ officers are going to be there for the public hearings as they were for the ones behind closed doors where they could control sort of what was happening. And to ensure that no public testimony would be inconsistent with the interviews conducted by the OIG or the grand jury. Now, it could be something else completely different. It could be Proud Boys testimony, and we know some of it has to do with that. We saw that in the first hearing with Bertino. Proud Boy, who I said raided the same day Taria was arrested, has not been charged, appears to be cooperating with the committee, probably cooperating with Department of Justice. DOJ may simply need to check consistency of their cooperating extremist leaders' testimony ahead of their upcoming trial. Regardless, Andrew, I don't think the hearing was postponed because of tired videographers.
I love the work that you've done here, and let me just add one point to it, right? Which is the January 6th committee can, at its discretion, release testimony to the Department of Justice. They're the ones in control of that. But it doesn't work that way in reverse, right? Grand jury testimony is confidential, is sealed. You have to go to the court and qualify under one of the exceptions under the federal rules and move to release that testimony. So the DOJ can't just turn over any grand jury transcripts that might exist of Donahue and Rosen, right? What they can do is you can bring somebody into the room. You can bring Graves into the room, right? And say, hey, this is what we're going to put up on the screen as Donahue having said. We've double checked this against the OIG transcripts that they've given to us. Is this consistent with what was said during the grand jury testimony? And so without revealing the contents of that testimony, right, Graves could say, yes, this is consistent, or no, this is not consistent, right? And that does not require you to go to court and get a motion to make public that grand jury testimony. So I know there's a lot of beans going on here, but I love the work that you've done here. I think the analogy to Sussman is really strong. I think when you're talking about multiple statements, one of the things as a lawyer is just people who are telling the truth can give slightly inconsistent statements, right? Like it just happens. Memory is fallible. Words are fungible, right? Like it's tough. And so I find what you're saying very, very plausible. I certainly find it more plausible than the it's my first day. I'm sorry, the video team's super tired. Like that felt weird when that came out.
Yeah,
so,
and
I love it.
You really have to sort of suss out these inconsistencies when there's multiple investigations going on in different agencies before you bring charges, before you're in court. And the opposing counsel can bring forth all of your inconsistent testimony to impeach you as a witness and tank the prosecution. Yeah. Now, trust me, there was a lot more wrong with the Sussman investigation than what the Department of Justice is looking at in either the Donahue, Rosen Clark case or the Proud Boys cases or the Oath Keepers cases. But you still, even if you are on the righteous side of prosecution, and there are inconsistent testimonies, that defense lawyer can immediately jump in there and impeach the shit out of your prosecuting witnesses and make it very difficult for you to get a conviction. Or they can use it to overturn on appeal. I mean, there's a lot of different things at play, but that is what I think has to be foremost on Department of Justice's mind. Like, we're trying to, even if it's not Trump, even if it's just the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers for seditious conspiracy, which is a big fucking deal, by the way, we got to make sure that we don't have any inconsistencies in these testimonies that can impeach our witnesses on the stand.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I just want to add one last thing, which is let's imagine that Donahue has given inconsistent testimony on a particular point, right? That doesn't sink him as a witness. It sinks him as a witness if you're not prepared for that, right? If you are prepared, right, then you introduce that, and then you also ask, right, on direct, and this is the way it would work in a prosecution, but you could easily do something similar in a public presentation by the committee. Then you would just ask him, now, isn't it also true, Mr. Donahue, that you said something inconsistent with that you previously said, X, right? And then, you have him say, yeah, I did. And I was talking about Y, Z, and A, right? You front it. You come out, you say, hey, the other side is going to get up and try and impeach you and say that you said something contradictory. Tell us why that's not the case.
Yeah,
right?
draw
and
the blood.
Difference,
bring it out first, and
the difference between that is the difference between a witness who's credible versus a witness that becomes impeached. So I love it. This strikes me as exactly the kind of thing that that smart lawyers putting together a case are likely to do. So I think you've done a massive service here, and we'll just have to wait and see if you were correct.
Yeah, and we might never know.
Yeah, well,
in which case,
can always declare victory.
Yeah, in which
and then
case
withdraw.
I'm right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
That's how it works. Well, this is fascinating. I'm going to be back in that hearing room tomorrow. Yesterday, for those listening. So,
so jealous.
Go back and you can look at the Twitter feed and see what I've posted from there. And again, I could get bumped. I might get bumped out, but that's so far. I'm pretty sure I'm in like Flynn. So. It's not Michael Flynn, but you know what I'm talking about. So I'm excited. I'm excited for that. And I can't think of anything else I wanted to talk about today. I just wanted to get that whole Sussman thing off my chest because people seem to be frothing, as Empty Wheel says, about, why doesn't the DOJ do their own fucking interviews? And, look, it's not about that. It's a consistency issue. And Chuck Rosenberg brought it up too. Right, he's the guy who planted the seed, and I was like, well, this is just like the Sussman trial, so that's why I wanted to bring in that example. So anyway, that is it. We're going to get together, you and I, Andrew, and figure out when we're going to have our next patron Zoom meeting. So if you want to become a patron for as little as $1 an episode and be able to get on that Zoom hangout, you can do that at patreon.com/aisle45pod, aisle45pod. And that's all I have today. Do you have anything else? Any final thoughts?
Nope. I think you did a masterful job, and I, like the rest of our audience, will be patiently waiting for yesterday's hearing.
Tomorrow is yesterday. Isn't that a Star Trek? Okay. I will see you. Indeed. I will see you all there
DC
tomorrow
Fontana,
in the past. All right. This has been Clean Up on Aisle 45. I've been Allison Gill.
And I'm Andrew Torrez, and until next week.
Clean Up on Aisle 45 is written, researched, and produced by Allison Gill and Andrew Torrez with editing by Molly Hockey. Our art and logo design are by Joelle Reeder and Moxie Design Studios, and our music is composed and performed by Adam Orr. Clean Up on Aisle 45 is a proud member of the MSW Media Network, a collection of creator-owned podcasts dedicated to news, politics, and justice. For more information, visit mswmedia.com. MSW Media.
Season 4 of How We Win is here.
For the past 4 years, we've been making history in critical elections all over the country. And last year, we made history again by expanding our majority in the Senate, beating election-denying Republicans in crucial state house races, and fighting back a non-existent red wave.
But the MAGA Republicans who plotted and pardoned the attempted overthrow of our government now control the House, thanks to gerrymandered maps and repressive anti-voter laws. And the chaotic spectacle we've already seen shows us just how far they will go to seize power, dismantle our government, and take away our freedoms.
So, the official podcast of The Persistence is back with Season 4. There's so much more important work ahead of us to fight for equity, justice, and our very democracy itself. We'll take you behind the lines and inside the rooms where it happens with strategy and inspiration from progressive changemakers all over the country.
And we'll dig deep into the weekly news that matters most and what you can do about it with messaging and communications expert, co-founder of Way to Win, and our new co-host, Jennifer Fernandez-Ancona.
So join Steve and I every Wednesday for your weekly dose of inspiration, action, and hope.
I'm Steve Pearson.
And I'm Jennifer Fernandez-Ancona.
And this is how we win.